as you know, after we received feedback from the COAB from others, we're having the meeting in one room tonight. And we hope to have a really productive meeting. Can you hear? Okay. A productive and respectful conversation. Thus, we need everybody's cooperation to make that happen tonight. I'm going to be chairing tonight's meeting as the settlement agreement requires that the COCO chair COAB meetings. And we know things have been difficult, and after there's a great deal to discuss tonight, and given the things that are on the agenda, we thought it would be best to have a professional facilitator come in and help us facilitate that discussion. And we're very fortunate that Maria Elena Capistegi was available and willing to do that for us tonight. We know that she's worked well with the COAB in the past, and we're grateful to have her assist with us again tonight. Before I turn the meeting over to Maria Elena, I just want to ask that, in the wake of the tragedies of last week in the US, as well as the tragedies in France today, I think we all need to find some compassion for each other as we move forward doing the work on police reform and the settlement agreement. I don't mean to minimize any of the pain or hurt that people have experienced in the past. I just hope that we can try to take a step back and really see each other as human beings and work together so we can have this discussion tonight. Just wanted to let everybody know we do have Avel Gordley and V. Riviere, as well as Seth Wayne from the U.S. Attorney's Office on the phone tonight, so he's available if there's any particular points that we need clarification on. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Maria Elena now, and she's going to help facilitate our discussion tonight.
Thank you, Amy. I'm pleased to be here. I just want to say I'm not a City of Portland employee, do not work for any other public agency, so I'm just here as a neutral third party to help support, run the meeting. And I see it as my role to ensure that all voices are heard, both from the COAB as well as from community members. Before we move on with our business today, I'd like to recognize that it's been a really difficult and emotional few days, few weeks. Okay, here we go. The tragic events that took the lives of Alton Sterling, Philando Castillo, and 5 Dallas police officers. So I'd like to just provide the space that if anyone would like to share a reflection, that we were able to do that.
I just want a reminder for them, when you're speaking, make sure you turn on your mic so we can hear you.
Again, just a moment of silence for the lives lost in Dallas, Texas, and Louisiana, and Wisconsin, and throughout the country. Request a moment of silence, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to share? So we're all in this room together because the COAB members deeply value community input and engagement. However, there's a lot of work to be done. And so as with every COAB meeting, we're going to begin with a brief statement of the purpose of COAB and some of the expected conduct for our meeting. So the purpose of the COAB meetings is the orderly consideration of the public's business as it relates to the settlement agreement between the City of Portland and the U.S. Department of Justice. Preservation of order and decorum is necessary for due consideration of matters before the COAB. The public is welcome to attend COAB meetings. During the COAB meeting, there will be time-limited opportunities for public comment. Public testimony on an agenda item should address the matter being considered. Other options for later testimony are emails or snail mail. When testifying, please state your name for our records. We do not need your address. Unless otherwise informed, each community member will have 2 to 3 minutes to speak to the COAB. At the end of that time, a signal will sound to signify to the person speaking that he or she has reached the time limit, and it is now time for the next person to speak. We ask that you respect the time limit so there is time to hear from each person who has signed up to speak, and please testify only to the matter at hand. COAB rules of procedure seek to preserve the public order to ensure that the COAB's deliberations proceed efficiently and that those who want to contribute have the opportunity to be heard. Behavior that disrupts the meeting from its purpose by interrupting either testimony or deliberations is not allowed. You may show support or displeasure with your hands. You can wave, thumbs up, thumbs down. You're free to film COAB meetings. There is no section for filming tonight. We just ask that you respect people's personal space, and this will minimize the distractions and the discomfort that are sometimes caused by filming. This is a warning that anyone disrupting this proceeding may be escorted from the COAB meeting and excluded from the remainder of that meeting. The COAB members approved, I'm going to get this closer. I feel like I'm about to jump on it. The COAB members approved guidelines for maintaining common ground. They were approved on September 10th, 2015. So I will remind us of those. You will abide by these. So I'm going to ask those of you on this. I'm going to ask those of you on the phone to mute because all of us can hear you. And so I'm going to continue reading them, the guidelines. Abide by these ground rules. Critique ideas, not people. Work towards shared understanding. Speak from personal experience without generalizing, using I statements, and speak to all with the utmost respect. Avoid crosstalk. Listen respectfully when others are speaking. Listen actively and attentively, and seek to understand. Share the air. Refrain from monopolizing discussions, and encourage participation by everyone. Challenge ideas in a respectful manner. Avoid put-downs, even humorous ones, or other attacks on individuals. Ask for clarification when unsure or confused. Exit meetings in a way that is non-disruptive to the group dynamic. Recognize the legitimacy of people's feelings and support COAB members in expressing their feelings in ways appropriate to the setting. Hold one another accountable to keep agenda times and focus. Support the chair in managing meetings. Turn cell phones off or to vibrate and make no calls or texts during meetings except in case of an emergency. During meetings, use laptops only for meeting business and use the parking lot for thoughts and ideas not relevant to current conversation. We can use, do we have another parking lot other than this one here? We can just take and run off, okay? Terrific.
If you'd like to make a call, please hang up and try again. If you need help, hang up and then dial your operator.
Okay. So I think we're ready to begin our meeting. I understand that the COAB Executive Committee recently met and that there's information around the process to make modifications to the settlement agreement that you wish to bring forward.
I apologize, our tech folks are working on this.
So is there a member of the executive committee that is ready to talk about the process to make modifications to the settlement agreement? So if, in case anyone does not know, Philip is the newly elected chair of the executive committee. Hello.
Good evening, everyone. Before we get started with the discussion for the agenda items, I would just first like to say, on behalf of the COAB team, I just want to thank the COCL team for listening to our comments and for working with us in order to make this meeting happen in this room for all the community members to be a part of this meeting tonight. Thank you. Moving on, we had the executive committee meeting last week, and we have decided to draft an open letter. Tom was the one who started drafting this, and most of us did agree to sign the letter. So I'm going to turn this over to Tom to speak about the letter. But I guess before I do that, I'd just like to, actually, I'll turn it over to Tom now, and then I'll take back over and explain more about the due process that we want to discuss tonight for modifications for the settlement agreement. But go ahead, Tom.
Is this on? Is this on?
Hit that button.
The background for the open letter that 9 of the 10 remaining COAB members signed is that 3 or 4 COAB members suggested that the COAB should be chairing itself. The COAB should select its chair from its membership, and that we should not be chaired by the COCL. And we attempted, Jimmy and Philip leading the effort, to schedule an emergency COAB meeting to address the issue, because the COCL was in the process of hiring a new local person to serve as the chair of the COAB, and we were opposed to that happening and wanted to have the issue addressed. The response by the COCL was that we were out of order attempting to address that issue. It was a matter that the COCL was in charge of. The COCL was going to be hiring, and the COCL would consult with the COAB in some way. We didn't find that satisfactory and wanted to stop that process because it didn't make sense to spend the money and the time hiring somebody that the COAB may not want. So I was involved with drafting an open letter, which 9 of the 10 remaining COAB members agreed to sign. All 10 were given the opportunity to sign. The letter simply said that we thought it was crucial to the continuing operation of the COAB to be able to select its chair from its own membership. And that was brought before the executive committee a week or 10 days ago, and it was approved by the executive committee in the sense that it was moved to the full COAB for its consideration. So what I then did to sort of follow that up is I drafted a specific recommendation, which I believe is in your package. It's number 1, and it captures the spirit of the open letter that the COAB should be chairing itself. What happened yesterday is germane to the discussion and then the vote. The COCL issued a petition in which it asked to be removed as the chair of the COAB. I honestly haven't had a complete opportunity to digest that memo, nor have I had a chance to look at an accompanying report that was written by Kathleen Sadat, who was the former chair of the COAB from the COCL. I will say that the tenor of the COCL memo was to blame the COAB, to blame the community, and essentially accept no responsibility for the situation that has resulted in not only the COAB wanting to chair itself, but the COCL wanting out from that responsibility. So I can either touch on the process and what this means. I think I will just briefly. the settlement agreement, as it's currently written, requires the COCO to chair the COAB and gives the COCO pretty much blanket authority to run meetings, set agendas, and that sort of thing. To change that, it requires an agreement by the DOJ and the city. Neither the COCO nor the COAB are parties to the agreement. I know Philip has talked to the DOJ. I know a number of others have, and I have. And it's my sense that they are receptive to amendments to fix problems in the existing settlement agreement. I have no idea what the city will view, either our recommendation if we pass it, or the COCO's petition to get out of being the COCO chair. So I think that's kind of the background and where we're at with that first recommendation. I'm happy to answer questions or provide other context.
So I guess the first recommendation, getting into that, the first recommendation will be that COAB should be allowed to select a chair rather than the chair being appointed by the COCO, and should be required by modification of the settlement agreement. The DOJ and the city should agree and make motion on this as soon as possible. And I guess I just want to explain a little bit about this specific recommendation. Unfortunately, COAB's, how COAB has been operated hasn't been healthy. There have been a lot of struggles that we've faced, and of course, because of the settlement agreement, we need to address this as soon as possible so we can really focus on strategic movements and moving forward and continuing with our work instead of focusing on this issue. So we're hoping to get this addressed, and that's the first recommendation in itself. So does somebody want to make a motion on this recommendation?
Yes, sir.
Point of clarification for the minutes, are you recommending the contents of the open letter? Are you, is it simply COAB should be allowed to select its own chair? Can you repeat the motion?
I'm just asking if who would like to make this motion. So does someone want to clarify their motion?
COCO. And everything Tom said as it relates to the COCO being COAB being having its own chair, I second that motion. I'm okay with that. So I want to make a motion. Is that what I need to do? Make a motion that we vote on? Well,
You made the motion for COAB to select its own chair. Is there a second?
I second it.
Discussion? Yes, Rabbi.
Thank you. So as someone who dissented from signing the letter, I want to speak in favor of the motion. I have no objection to a member of COAB being the chair of the meetings. I think that's actually a very positive step, and I would endorse it. The letter implied to me that there was a desire for the COCO not to hire an executive director. And I believe that would be a mistake. I think it's very important that there is a professional who's involved with the running of the operations, who has a day-to-day responsibility, who can be the communicator with all of the settlement parties. And so I encourage COCO to continue to pursue hiring of such an executive director, and I'm happy to. I think that, let me say this, to make this change, as I understand it from materials that we've been given in the conversation that Philip had with the DOJ, that's a change to the settlement agreement. I think there are a lot of things that need to change in the process of that agreement in terms of the operation of COAB, much of which I think the recommendations that came from Kathleen Sadat should be examined and discussed in some detail. So I'm very happy to have Jimmy's motion that we will vote on to be a part of that conversation, but only a part of it. I think there's much more that needs to be addressed.
I think it's unfair to assume that someone on the COAB could not chair the COAB. I think there are plenty of professionals around the table. I personally would not want to, but I know that some people that are part of the board are extremely skilled facilitators. So I think it's presumptuous to say that we don't have someone who's already part of this group who could chair this group. I don't know if our chair should be from this group, but I think that we should be able to choose the person who will be our chair. I think for the sake of like being able to move forward for us, I think it would be best if we chose our own leader.
Philip?
Before we close discussion, I would like to give the community an opportunity to share their input about this recommendation. I'm curious to hear what the community thinks, if you dissent or if you agree with this, and then we will make a final decision on that and vote. But I'd like to get the community's input first.
So before we go to public comment, I want to make sure that there are no other members of the COAB that wish to comment. Rabbi.
I'm sorry if I just can clarify, because I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. I'm speaking, and I believe Jimmy's motion is speaking of chairing the meetings as we are today. I separate that from an executive director who runs the operations of the COAB.
So the motion that was made was that COAB be able to select its own chair.
I speak.
Yes, Tom?
Well,
and then we'll go to Dr.
What follows from that, and if we need to amend the motion, I will suggest we do so. What follows from that is that we chair ourselves by selecting somebody from our membership, just like the COCO chair has been chairing us. So to the extent that there's some suggestion that we want just somebody to show up at this meeting and chair, that's not what our intent is. Our intent is that the COAB chair will have the full range of authority and responsibilities that the COCO, who's been chairing us, has had. So I believe that's what everyone has believed what we were trying to get done. If not, I'm happy to offer a friendly amendment to it to make it clear.
That's the motion I'm putting forward. Well, we chair ourselves as well, and we have the right to select or do have the same responsibilities as the previous chair has as it relates to liaison and working with everyone, all parties involved. That's
so we're following an order. Thank you, Rochelle. You're passing it? Okay. Philip.
Yeah, I just want to make a friendly reminder to everyone in this room that whoever the person is that becomes the chair, historically, the COCO has chosen that person to become the chair, and it's been a frustrating experience for them because they're trying to essentially fix the airplane while it's been flying, and it's been a big mistake. But choosing a chair from our own COAB team, they've already been involved in the process, been in the meetings, done the work, and has been here from the beginning and gets our process, knows the ins and outs, knows our goals, knows our work, our process for our work, and has been inside the COAB. But trying to put somebody else in from the outside and have them catch up, learn about the system, about the different roles, about the bylaws, about everything, they're really at a loss there, and it hasn't been working. So that's really, I'm just trying to emphasize that as the reminder of why this is happening.
Rochelle.
Well, in light of the fact that the COCO did file a petition asking for separation from the COAB, it doesn't seem to make sense that the COCO would continue to chair the COAB when they want total separation from us. So I think what the motion is that a member of the COAB chair the committee, like run the meetings, and also do all the things that Kathleen did.
Amy?
And that's something that will require an amendment to the settlement agreement. So that's, I mean, pushing that recommendation forward to the party so that can happen. I think that's where we need to get to tonight, is figuring out what those recommendations are. But it'll take a little bit of time because there is a process so that whatever the group ends up with, it's legal within the settlement agreement.
So we'll go to Rabbi, and then we'll go to
Thank
Philip.
you. So I I appreciate, Philip, what you are stressing and your reasons for doing so. I'm going to strongly dissent. I think that we vastly underestimate the amount of time, the responsibilities that are inherent in the position that we're describing. If someone wants to take that on as a full-time responsibility and they're a member of the COAB, more power to you. That would be fantastic. But I don't think that you need to have been a member for the past 12 plus months. I think that any professional and any executive director would have the knowledge and the responsibility to do all of the things that you described, Philip, to catch up, to understand what has been happening, to understand the legal elements of it. And I think that the time required is it's a full-time job. And I think it should be treated, I think we should be treated with that kind of respect as an organization. Or any organization I know requires someone to take on that management position and keep them organized. I would rather that it's a person that is not inherently a member of. I would appreciate that we would have involvement with selecting that person, and that we would express confidence in that hire. I think that would be extremely useful. But to imagine that of the, how many are left? We have 10 of us. That any one of us wants to take on that position as a full-time job, I would be surprised.
Philip, did you want to comment?
I've got a question for Amy. You had said that the due process requires time, but with your petition, you're expecting this to happen fairly immediately, a quick separation. So isn't that in conflict with what you just said about it requiring time to change the settlement agreement?
I don't know that we expect it to happen tomorrow. We're pushing a recommendation forward to the parties, but we do have the expectation that it'll take some time for them to consider that and come to some agreement around that. I don't believe that it'll be immediate, but hopefully it will be expedited, the discussion. One thing I did want to point out in terms of picking a COAB chair from the membership, if it's someone that you're thinking of taking a larger role, the other part of the settlement agreement that talks about COAB members is that there are time-limited appointments. So that's something also that needs to be considered when thinking about what the recommendation is moving forward.
Other comments?
I'd like to close discussion.
Okay. So we can open it up for public comment. Yes. Okay. Do we have any members of the public that would like to comment? We have a comment chair here, right in front. If you would like to line up, you'll have 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Good evening, COAB members and audience. Thank you for all your work. I I heartily endorse the position that was taken in the almost unanimous letter, but I do think that, I don't know if we want to call it the Kahana dissent, but I think it raises important points in that we don't really have any documentary evidence, but Ms. Sadat had a very well compensated and perhaps extensive workload. It was never really broken out in FTEs or hours that the citizens got to see, but the work, there is a lot of more than bureaucratic work. And when I mention bureaucratic work, I also want us to harken back to the days of when we almost gave former Chief Justice Demunis a heart attack or whatever it is that we might have done. And his presentation, thank you, was more about doing community outreach, I think. And I don't think many of us feel that Ms. Sadat saw the work in the same way. So I hope that there'll be time for the COAB members and the community to have a vigorous discussion about a bureaucratic, professional, managerial, executive director or something maybe of the COAB, and a person to work on community engagement, which has been somewhat forestalled while we've had some interesting dynamics here among the COAB. Thank you.
Could you state your name for the record, please?
Oh, I think I did, but Charles Johnson.
Thank you. If you could please start with your name for the record, we'd appreciate it.
My name is Nancy Newell. I've been an activist in this community for a lot of years, so I'm very familiar with how different processes work. I've been shocked at the appointment of Ms. Sadat because it was more of a form of oppression of information sharing in the educational process of the community understanding what even this was all about and how important it was. And I'll just cite one activity that I had with her, which was very upsetting. And the reason that there is such pressure here today on these wonderful people that have spent hours trying to make this process work. Because as you see all over the United States, if it doesn't work, our community suffers horribly. So we brought in a book that was written by an expert to one of the committees that is responsible for accountability, and it was on the topic of accountability. Seattle uses it as a model, and I was refused by the chair to be able to hand it to members of the committee, and I was stood in front of physically and blocked, and she stomped her cane to prevent me physically from offering that information. That wasn't a good start to a relationship with the chair of that very important situation. And many times, the agenda was made up without the input of the full COAB, which I think was not an appropriate way to carry on these kinds of discussions. And I still don't know if the people that were on the phone with that horrible interruption are still on the phone, because they should be, and I hope they are. Can you confirm that? Okay, so those are my comments. I think we could make it a lot healthier. I think you should respect, if you're talking about respect in this room, respect these people. Their lives are complicated. They're trying to solve very serious problems, and I think they're making a very good suggestion.
Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, I'm Joanne Hardesty, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you, COAB members. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and thinking about how we move forward with this work. But I want to remind you, because I was under the same impression as the rabbi about what the proposal was, and I want to remind you that the two people who chaired it both worked 60 to 80-hour weeks, and both resigned partly because of exhaustion. And so as someone who is here representing the community, I'm not speaking for the AMA tonight because we haven't had a conversation about this yet. I'm speaking just as a community member. After observing the sheer exhaustion of the staff and the sheer frustration of the community who wants to be heard, I think it's really important that you COAB members own the COAB process, but I caution you on thinking that as volunteers people, many of you have full-time jobs, you have families, and you're already volunteering 20 to 30 hours a week. I want to caution you about thinking that you can absorb another 60 to 80 hours a week. I think the reality is that the work that you do is critical, especially with what's happening in our country right now. And we cannot afford for you to fail. And so do what you do. Gather the data, analyze the data, hear from the community, but have somebody that's doing the work that has to happen to bring you together so that you spend your 20 to 30 hours of volunteer time actually looking at whether or not Portland Police is changing. Because for where I sit in the community, we don't know if any change has happened. And I've been with you from the beginning. In fact, I helped birth you. And so I have a stake in this. I have a stake in your success. And so I humbly ask you to revise your proposal and focus on what you do. But I absolutely agree with you. The person who gets hired that's supposed to represent you out in the community, you have an absolute right to have a say in who that person is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. I want to join Joanne in thanking the board for having this discussion. I also want to thank you for having this meeting in one place where we're all together. I too am a member of the AMA Coalition, but I'm speaking on behalf of Portland Cop Watch tonight, as usual. I want to also remind you something that I've mentioned a few times before, that the original settlement agreement said that the COCL chair was going to have a vote on this board. And the community wrote to the city council and demanded that that be changed, and it was changed before the agreement was signed. What ended up happening, though, is that often the COCL ended up having 16 votes. In other words, it could override what this body wanted to do. So I really encourage you to go forward with this motion and bear in mind that you need your own autonomy. That said, I also want to echo partially what the rabbi and what Joanne said. I do not think you need an executive director. I think what you need is a staff person that's dedicated to making the COAB function, and that can be done. The PDC has a staff person that's at the direction of this community volunteer board. We also, I'm surprised Joanne didn't bring this up, we also should talk, though, about making sure you get a stipend for all the time that you're putting in. And this is something we brought up, I don't know how long ago that was, but from the beginning, because you're all doing a lot of work, and we all appreciate that. My feeling, and I'm not a lawyer, is that at the beginning of each meeting, until this is resolved through the settlement agreement change, the COCL can sit at the table and say, as the chair of this meeting, I'm now delegating my authority to, boom, whoever the chair is on this board. And then if that chair is not skilled at facilitating meetings, they can still chair the group, and it can help make the executive committee meetings happen. But then they can help have somebody like this facilitator, who's here with you tonight, to help run the meetings, which not the same thing as having the kind of person running the meetings we've had since the beginning. That's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments?
So my name is David Keefe Davis, and I noticed that there's a squad of police cars that are parked outside waiting in preemptive strike mode to arrest any activist or anyone that possibly goes over by a minute or two, like, Amy Watson and whoever was the director who had me arrested at the June 9th meeting, remember, after I was slandered, and then arrested for speaking about the approximate time that Dan Handelman just did. But, the reason you're resigning is because you guys really are unqualified for the job. And because, you know, you had people arrested, mentally ill people arrested for using their First Amendment rights, and not only using their First Amendment rights, but in defense of being slandered by one of your board members. So you should resign, not only, you know, saying, and I see your little narrative, your little divorce papers acting like it was the community and COAB and everyone else, but you need to take a big responsibility in your screwing up Rosenbaum and Watson, you know, because you guys are one of the reasons that this whole thing has not got further, because you have Rosenbaum, who worked for DARPA, right? A scientific advisor for DARPA. I know about his past. And I know about the RAND Corporation and DARPA and management of public perception and all the other stuff, and how this whole thing might possibly just be something that leads down a worse road than what we have actually, because I don't think that the Department of Justice is a very nice agency. And, you know, they're the same people that monitored Black Lives Matter activists too. So just keep that in mind, that didn't that happen right here in the state of Oregon, that we had the Department of Justice monitoring people with the hashtags FTP and Black Lives Matter? So these are the same guys that we're relying on to reform the police. And, you know, I think it's going to take more than the Department of Justice to reform the police. It's going to actually take like activists and community members. And maybe there needs to be something that's more like a COAB, but with some activist push behind it, that instead of, you know, writing up all these proposals and then putting them out to COCL and the PPB and having them throw it in the shredder and say thanks but no thanks, you know, maybe people need to hit the streets and come to City Hall and do some real stuff that actually creates real change, instead of just thinking that another board set up by a bunch of elected people is really going to reform the cops. I mean, this might do a little reform, but in the long run, this is not going to reform the police. And that's all I got to say for now, but
Thank you.
it's nice that I didn't end up in handcuffs tonight.
Do we have any other public comments?
Prefer to stand if I can. Yes, my name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Watchdog PDX. I do agree with the COAB to select the chair. One of the biggest concerns, I guess, I have with the possible selection of the chair is that I want to have an emphasis on public communication. I want to have an emphasis on somebody being able to run the meeting properly, understand that when people want some additional time, there's also a word called reasonableness. And Federal Judge Michael Simon can really explain that to you, that you need to understand that sometimes reasonableness goes a long way with the public. And sometimes allowing people, if they say, hey, I really want to go another 30 seconds, can I do that? Why not? Let them do that. They took the time to show up to the meeting, try to come up with some of their ideas, create some solutions. Show a little respect with your rules and regulations. Don't overreach on your speech codes, but respect the public and they'll return the respect to you. And that's something that Federal Judge Michael Simon understands. He's a constitutional scholar, understands the First Amendment right, and understands freedom of speech of the public to present their ideas and not feel threatened that they'll be arrested by the police if they go over their time. Again, focus on the word reasonableness and show respect to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there additional public comment?
I say we close discussion if there's no more comment.
Discussion. Okay, we're closing public comment. Public comment is now closed. Tom?
I haven't responded directly to the rabbi's comments or the comments by Joanne and Dan, and I want to put that in context. There's at least one other recommendation that was not before the executive committee, but that I've prepared and I'd like to have considered tonight, and it has to do with substantially reducing the role of the COCO. But having said that, I also worked with some people in drafting a list of issues which address other matters that the COAB, I think, needs to visit in order to move forward effectively. And one of the items is what paid staff and funding does the COAB need to fulfill its responsibilities under the settlement agreement? And that's an issue that encompasses the concerns that the rabbi has. There will be a need, maybe as Dan suggested, for someone to help the chair. It is a big job. But I think what we're going to be talking about is a major restructuring. It's not simply the issue of the chair. And I know from talking to the DOJ, they're interested in reducing some of the COAB responsibilities because they have been overwhelming. And replacing the COCO with a court-appointed monitor is something I want to get to later. But there are other issues that I think will address some of the concerns that the rabbi has. But I, again, believe that we absolutely have to select the chair from our own membership, and that person should have the authority and responsibilities that the COCO did when it was chairing us in terms of setting agendas and doing those kinds of things.
Are you ready for a vote?
I am.
Okay, to clarify, so the vote is on the recommendation that the COAB should select its own chair?
From its own membership.
From its own, so you want that as part of from its own membership? So, okay. All right, so I will take roll. It's not going to be posted up there?
We don't have the connection, but I am tracking it here.
Okay. Rabbi Kahana? Catherine Gardner? Yvelle Gordley?
It's a little behind, but I'll let you know what her vote is.
Jimmy Johnson? Guida Langford? Maria Medina?
Sorry, what was that vote?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yours was yes as well. V. Riviere?
Waiting for her vote.
Okay. Rochelle Silver? Yes. Tom Steenson?
Yes.
Philip Wolf?
Yes.
That's 7-1. We need to wait for somebody on the phone to vote. V and Avell, I think we have you back on the phone, though perhaps not connected to the room. We have a motion on the floor. COAB should be allowed to select its chair from its members. Do you have a vote? We can hear you. Did you hear the motion? Sorry, I apologize. I will repeat that. We have you back on the phone, but not yet connected to the room audio. There's a motion on the floor. COAB should be allowed to select its own chair from its members. Do you have a vote? V is aye. Senator Gordley?
Aye.
9-1. Motion passes.
Okay,
Yes.
the motion passes.
So, you're not going to believe this, but we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So I'm going to ask the COAB members if you would like to continue or if you would like to take a break. Continue. Great. Okay, so let's not, I shouldn't have assumed. Those of you that are ready to take a break, can you just show of hands? That's 4. Those of you that would like to continue? You're the deciding, Jimmy? Okay. Was that a yes? Let's take a little break. Okay, so we will take a 15-minute break. So it is 6:35. At 6:50, we will be back. Hello.
Just one moment, too. We're going to go old school here. We've got Avel and V on this phone. So to the degree we're able to, we're gonna pass it around. They'll be able to hear us better that way.
So Tom Steenson has brought several recommendations for discussion. Tom, I'm going to pass it to you if you could provide an overview, and then we will allow some time for clarifying questions.
Partially as a result of conversations with people, COAB people, related to the open letter and the chair issue, but also from conversations I've had with some community people. We sort of loosely agreed upon a list of, I think it's 8 issues, and they're in the packet. And number 1 had to do with the chair, and we've addressed that. Number 2 has to do with the court-appointed monitor, which I want to get to in the form of a recommendation. And number 5 has to do with the COAB having independent private legal counsel, and I want to deal with that as a recommendation too. So turning to the court-appointed monitor, let me put that in context. If you look around the country where the DOJ has sued cities, counties over pattern practices in a variety of areas, but just looking at use of force, or too much force has been used. I think it's fair to say, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but uniformly, except for in Portland, they have agreed with the governmental entity that's been sued to allow a court-appointed monitor. And so a position is created, the court chooses the monitor. The monitor is given broad sweeping powers to talk to people in the particular law enforcement agency that's involved, to look at data, to ask questions, and then prepare changes, necessary changes from the court-appointed monitor's point of view, to implement the settlement agreement, to make sure the particular settlement agreement is fulfilled. The court-appointed monitor then will meet both with the DOJ and the law enforcement people, and typically consensus is reached, because what the court-appointed monitor is doing is looking at best practices throughout the country, and they're typically the right thing to do. So those consensus agreement, or in the cases where there isn't consensus, the recommendation of the monitor goes to the court, and the court approves typically everything that the monitor has recommended. To give an example, Seattle was sued in 2012, just like the city of Portland was sued. In Seattle, a court-appointed monitor was put in place. And in Seattle, there have been, the reforms probably equal a couple of old-fashioned phone books in terms of written policy changes, training requirements, sometimes hiring issues, whatever needs to be done. What's happened here, by comparison, as we know, we've worked hard. Let me back up. The court-appointed monitors are they're experts in the field of law enforcement. They are people that have national credibility. They know how to find best practices. They know what best practices are. They understand police departments. They're literally experts in the field, and that's why they get chosen by the courts to oversee the process. As a COAB, we've been trying to do much of that same kind of work, and none of us are experts, and none of us have that kind of experience. None of us have the kind of time that the court-appointed monitors have and the staffing they have to do that work. And so, to varying degrees, some of us spent a lot of time, some have spent less time, but you know how much time it took to go through those at our meetings and try to struggle with them. And a lot of times, quite frankly, they're technical issues about law enforcement that are hard to understand. Monitors understand them because that's what they do. They have that kind of experience. as you also know, in our process, once we pass the recommendation, it goes off. And to date, I've seen only one response from the DOJ indicating that, I'm not sure how many recommendations they were. I think there were mental health committee recommendations that they now have addressed, and they're now requiring the DOJ to do something. But we are woefully behind getting reforms under our settlement agreement. And there's no timeline for the DOJ getting it done. It's not clear what the city will be willing to agree to or not agree to. And let me add one other piece to this. The Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition was one of the main movers behind the COAB getting set up because they really wanted community oversight. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think we all think that we should continue to function with community oversight. But some of the work that we're trying to do can better, in my opinion, be done by a court-appointed monitor, be done more efficiently. And we would be allowed to weigh in. It isn't like the court-appointed monitor would have the authority just to ignore us. We would still be part of the process. And our ideas and thoughts and so forth can still either come internally from the COAB or taking into account community people. So our role is the same in terms of trying to get reforms in place, but we just aren't, we aren't the experts to do that. And I think that model that has a more solid base to get that work done and allow us to then have our voices heard about those policies and concerns is the way to go. Because I just don't see anything happening. I mean, the lawsuit here happened in 2012 and virtually nothing has happened. And I'm not convinced that something is going to happen, or at least to the degree that it needs to. And I think a court-appointed monitor would go a long ways to doing that. Avell and V are on the phone, but I spoke to Avell during the break, and she's having trouble monitoring things. And she wanted me to let you know that she has thought about this issue as well, and V the same. And they both support the idea of a court-appointed monitor. Now, the recommendation, this is what the recommendation says. The COCO should be replaced in whole or in part by a court-appointed monitor with duties and responsibilities similar to the court-appointed monitors in cases brought by the DOJ against other cities such as Seattle and New Orleans. This would require as well a change in the settlement agreement. It's not something that we can do. It's not something that the DOJ can require of the city. It would take a modification of the settlement agreement. I have some reason to think that the DOJ would support that because I've heard from them that they are concerned about the amount of work that we're trying to do and the amount of work we're charged with under the settlement agreement. And the task is pretty overwhelming. And I think they would be receptive to a recommendation from us that they could then work with and make that consideration. Now, when I say the COCO should be replaced in whole or in part, I don't know whether if they went with a court-appointed monitor, there'd be anything left for the COCO to do, quite frankly. On a personal level, that would be fine with me. But it may be that the DOJ or the court-appointed monitor would think there was some role left for the COCO in making assessments. Probably not, but I don't know that. And that's not what, the recommendation isn't calling for that. It's calling for the court-appointed monitor, and what that then means in terms of the existence or continued existence of the COCO is a question for the DOJ and the city, I think. So that's the context and what I and some other people think about it.
Are there any clarifying questions of Tom?
I just have a statement. It seems like with
So this is a time for clarifying questions. We can then make a motion and then we can move into discussion after it's seconded. So I just want to, are there questions of Tom? Do you have a question? Yes.
I do. Tom, could you help us to understand the difference between a consent decree, which I think is what they have in Seattle and New Orleans and many other cities, and a settlement agreement? My understanding is, maybe not sufficient, but my understanding is the settlement agreement is something less than and less costly, and maybe the city preferred that because it would cost them less money.
I'm not sure. I don't know whether a consent decree is really different in terms of legality from a settlement agreement. I mean, the effect is the same. They both require, by agreement, whether you use the word consent or agreement, the city or whoever the law enforcement body is that's being taken to task by the DOJ to have to do some things. They've agreed to make changes pursuant to either the consent decree or the settlement agreement. So the result, I don't think, is any different. I don't know the history of the negotiations here between the city and the DOJ. So as to whether or not a court-appointed monitor was even on the table, I don't know. It may well be more expensive for the city. And again, I'm speculating. I think that the city, when reaching that agreement, understood that they were not going to be under the same sort of specter of control that a court-appointed monitor tends to have, and it would be, I say just, I don't mean in a negative way, but it would be just the COAB's recommendations or just the COCO's recommendations, as opposed to a court-appointed monitor who can go right to the judge and say, this is what I think we should get done. And again, typically, when the monitor does that, there's consensus by both sides. Typically, the DOJ and the law enforcement agency or the city, they agree at that point. But it may be more expensive. I don't know.
Are there any other questions? Rebecca Hanna.
Thanks. Tom, under this proposal, what would be the role of the COAB?
Mm-hmm.
I think the role of the COAB would be the same, although one of the other issues has somewhat to do with what the COAB continues to do. And I mentioned the DOJ is concerned about how much responsibility the COAB has under that settlement agreement because of the broad, it's 176 paragraphs and I don't know how many pages, and there's so much in there that we're supposed to be looking at. They are interested in, I think they're interested in trying to help us still work as a community oversight board, but not have the same degree of responsibility. And again, the court-appointed monitor would be, extremely helpful in reducing the amount of work that we're trying to do in terms of developing, researching recommendations. We then would, as a board, community board, could weigh in, offer changes, advocate for different recommendations. I mean, we wouldn't be silenced, but we wouldn't have to, have this responsibility for doing research, expert research on police practices and things like that, or mental health issues. I mean, there'd be people in place with that expertise. So I don't think our role would change. I don't think we'd feel the same level of responsibility for oversight, but we wouldn't have to do all of the groundwork in trying to figure out what the changes should be, what ought to be happening. The monitor, I think, would have more of the lead of that, would be my view of that.
Are there other questions, or are you ready to entertain a motion?
I would like to move that we vote on this recommendation, number 2, as is.
Philip, hold on a second. We've got Lakita.
point of order, the number 2 is phrased as a question.
Not on the recommendation sheet?
I beg your pardon.
That's okay.
Right.
Number 2 on the record. Thank you.
So, your second?
It wasn't a motion. We had. Okay, my question was, are there any other questions, or are we ready for a motion? And Laquita said she still had a question, and so we weren't ready for a motion.
Yeah, I don't have a
Okay,
question.
my apologies.
I have more of a statement to make that from what echoes in my mind, being a part of this, on this board from day one, is saying that it was an experiment and it's a unique process that we are a part of. And so I would like in 10, 15 years to look back and say Portland, Oregon had their own say in how things are done when it comes to police reform, that we have that in writing instead of continuing to look at other models. Portland is its own city and we need to set our own model, and that's why we are on this board and that's why we are doing this work. So for me to want to remove something that we've focused on for a year and a half is kind of late in the game. And I feel like if it was something that we needed to remove the COCO, that could have been discussed about possibly a year ago. So it doesn't give us any, road. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, but then that's what we signed up for.
So this is moving us into discussion, as opposed to a clarifying question. And so I will now.
I have a clarifying question.
Okay.
So I see here there's some questions around like how many people will be hired, that sort of thing. But just looking at it in terms of the COAB, is the COAB going to then be somewhat like its own nonprofit entity? Because if we're talking about having a board, we're talking about having staff, we're talking about having volunteers, we're talking about having legal help hired on, we're talking about all of these things. Is this something that's going to be like set up as its own nonprofit entity? Is that what we're looking to do by passing these recommendations?
I hadn't envisioned that. I don't think it would be necessary.
Because there, like, and then I'm just thinking about, I don't know, just because I'm thinking about where will the money come from? Where, like, will we be taking it from the money that was going into, like, the other chair's salary? Will we take that money? Then what are we trying to do with that? Because I think that it's great to have someone maybe do some chairing that's part of the COAB, but there still has to be people that are hired to work specifically for the COAB, right? Because we have we have 3 staff that are doing things, and sometimes that seems like it's not even enough. And I know that you all work really hard, so I'm not saying that you don't work hard. I know you do. It just seems like a lot of work, and I'm just wondering, like, I feel like we would have to have a large budget and really figure out a lot of things to change every bit of the whole structure of the COAB at this point. I don't know. It just seems like a lot. It seems like, because I think we're thinking like, okay, let's just hire someone from the COAB will chair it, and we'll get a legal counsel. That sounds really easy, but I just know that it's not really just that easy. Or maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe.
You have a question?
I have a comment.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead. Clarifying questions were just intended to understand this a little bit better. It seems like we're moving into discussion, and so what I would suggest is that Philip, you started making a motion. Would you like to?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move, and then we can go into discussion more in depth before we actually vote on the recommendation. But I just would like to go ahead with the motion and move from there.
Is the motion exactly as it's stated in this recommendation?
Yes.
Yes, word for word, number 2.
Okay, and
Oh, I'm sorry.
Jimmy, you seconded? Is there discussion?
I'd like to make some comments relative to what you were saying, Maria. I don't know if there would be more money involved, but the money would come from the money that the COCO has now, and I have no idea how much that is, but say hundreds and thousands of dollars. That money would be used for the court monitor and for whatever staff the COAB needs. So the money might be perfectly equal and sufficient. It might cost more and it might cost less. I don't know, but there would be a pile of money should the COCO not exist.
Philip?
I support Tom's recommendation, the second recommendation, and the reasoning for that is that this year we've done a lot of work. We've made numerous recommendations and we've seen very little result. Specifically, we've made results regarding the 48-hour rule. A few subcommittees voted, and to remove that immediately, the full COAB also made a vote, and still nothing has happened in regards to that. I think from my understanding, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but a court-appointed monitor would, well, first, the court-appointed monitor would be selected. We could get into the details about money, what that looks like, the budgeting, how to rearrange funds. We could get into that later, more of the details. But I think the point is that we would like someone to come in and somebody who's knowledgeable about the law, about details, somebody who's able to make results. And because we've been working so far for a year without a court-appointed monitor, and we haven't seen much from our efforts, so that's my thinking.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll make
Tasha.
I might as well make a comment. I don't know if this is working. So, I mean, I hear people expressing a lot of frustration about what hasn't happened, and I could probably point to several different reasons why. I'll give one quick example. The reason why there was something back on the mental health subcommittee's recommendations is because that happened to actually follow along with the work that the Police Bureau and the COCO and the DOJ were doing at the time. So some of the things that you're talking about as solutions to the problem won't really be a solution, because if you're not working hand in hand with other people that are actually doing the work, you're just going to be in the same frustrated spot, because the work is either not being done or it's slowed up because there is a lot to do. And the only other thing I would say is, just because there's some frustration that you haven't heard back on a recommendation doesn't mean that work hasn't happened. And I only say that because I'm trying not to be offended, but I work for a unit that wasn't around 3 years ago. It wasn't around 3 years ago because it is part of and is a result of the settlement agreement. So something has happened. There's been big changes. And you all sat through my presentation, the presentation from the people in my unit. So it's not a little change, it's a big change. And so I'm trying not to be offended that there's some perception that nothing has happened, but there are big things that have happened. And those are some of the things that really, honestly, I think you guys should be looking at and weighing in on. Like, do you like it? Do you not like it? Does it work? Is it working? Because we've been doing it for 3 years now. And actually 3.5 years now. So those are the things that I think would be beneficial from my perception that this committee would look at. Anyway, that's my piece.
Thank you. Rabbi Kahana.
Thank you, and thank you, Lieutenant Haker. I've thought long, and we've made some requests occasionally, but it seems not to have gone through the process, for our group to be asking exactly that question. What has changed since the settlement began? Not since we started our work, but what has happened? And I think we've heard from community members who are also asking that question. And I would have thought that the role of COAB would be in a large part to help to communicate that and to help to communicate from the public where we're dissatisfied with the change or the rate of change. Unfortunately, I haven't seen that happen. I have to say, speaking to the point, Tom, I'm absolutely intrigued by your recommendation. And to be honest, if at this moment, if we're taking a vote, I'd abstain because I really don't have enough information. I appreciate your presentation. I'd love to hear other presentations about the value or the potential downside of having a court-appointed monitor. I really don't know. This is the first that I've learned of it, and I would love to learn more. My friends, I think, though, this is really speaking to where we are and what it is that we're doing here tonight and what we're doing going forward. We are asking the questions about who we are and what COAB should become, which is not necessarily us as individuals. We are nearing the end of our term. We're involved with the frustration that I hear from Philip, and I agree with. I'm hearing the frustration from Lieutenant Hager and from others. And I think that we have learned a lot over this time. The job that we have right now, I believe, is to ask these questions that are being brought up here and to make a recommendation for what COAB 2.0 should be. All of this is going to have to go back to settlement agreement in any case. We can't make these changes. We can vote as much as we want. These are our recommendations, and I think we should vote, and I think we should make recommendations. And I think we should be very thoughtful about what those recommendations should be and present them as recommendations because that's all that we can do. These are going to have to be negotiated going forward. So we've got one interesting model that's been presented so far that has been voted on, that there should be that it should be a member of the COAB who is the chair. We've got another very interesting recommendation that's here. I don't feel qualified to vote on it, as I said, but I'm pleased that it's brought up because I think it's a revolutionary change. And I think I'd like to recommend that we continue to be thinking along those lines and work towards making these recommendations for what the next COAB will be.
Other comments?
Yes, I did have another one. So Tom, basically with the first two recommendations is just, I just want to be very clear because I don't have a lot of background on the second recommendation. So the first one is that we will choose a chair from our group, from the COAB board. And the second is just that we would hire on legal counsel to help with making the recommendations.
Of the three listed recommendations,
but we only went through two, right?
We've only talked about two.
Okay.
The first one passed, the chair.
Right. I'm just trying. So basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to see what are like the changes for the first two that will take place. Like, because there's a lot of language there. See, I feel like there's things in here that I'm not seeing. Like there's some kind of reading between the lines that I'm supposed to be doing. And I think like some of that is like what Rabbi Kahana is talking about, like just not feeling like I know enough information. And that's all. So that's why I'm trying to ask you to like be as clear as possible. And I'm trying to be as clear as possible because I'm thinking maybe there's something I don't see or I don't know. So I'm sorry, I'm not up to your level with the recommendations because I didn't make them, but I just want to be clear.
Let me clarify something. Although I'm presenting these recommendations, they're not my recommendations.
Okay.
I mean, they're taken from pieces of information and conversations I've had with other people, some COAB people, some community people.
Okay.
And I'm presenting them, but they're not mine.
Okay.
I'm not sure how to answer or address your concern. I don't think, I mean, if there was no mention of what this would mean about the COCL, then that would be something that would be left unsaid. But the recommendation is very upfront that this may mean in part or in whole, if the recommendation was agreed upon in some form, I mean, by the city and the DOJ, that the COCL would no longer exist or would look much differently than it does right now. Other than that, I'm not sure what else I could say. I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to see like the impact of what that really looks like in reality. So does that mean like if we don't have the COCL and we have a court-appointed person to help us, you know, pass recommendations, what would that look like? Would that mean that we wouldn't have access to a certain amount of funds? Would it mean that, you know, we wouldn't be able to have officers on our board? Like, I'm just asking, what does that look like?
I think those are entirely different issues. They're issues that are...
Because, like, so there's quite a few people that are in the room that work for COCL. And there usually always is, right?
Yes.
And there's quite a few people that work for COCL that help make decisions, that, you know, set up our meetings, that do all of these different things. So I'm asking, without COCL being a part of this process, like, I would imagine it would look a lot different, but like maybe we can try to like look at in what ways, or like what's the possibility of succeeding without having COCL involved, and succeeding without using their, like, because we're using a lot of their resources.
So we have others that want to get into the conversation, so I'm going to respectfully ask that we open this up a little bit more. Amy, you...
For the cities that have court-appointed monitors, typically the monitor's role is much bigger than the community engagement piece. It may include that. They generally have a much, much larger budget than what we have. And it may include a piece that supports that community engagement, whether it's what type of boards it is, but there would be a piece of the budget in the other cities to do that. It's a little bit different position. Here with the settlement agreement, DOJ, I believe, is officially the monitor. And so we play a little bit different role. In the cities that have the court-appointed monitor, then they take on much of what we do, but some additional roles as well, some of what DOJ is doing here. But it's typically a much larger budget, and again, a piece of that might be towards that community engagement piece to support those things. Because yeah, there's quite a bit in terms of resources to support making sure meetings happen, setting up, you know, any accommodations, setting up, televising it, and having the recordings. But that obviously would be a piece that would have to continue to be supported if the group's going to continue to meet.
Laquita.
I would like to know, or I would like to hear from Joanne if on this recommendation, because if you can speak to that, if you have any thoughts, I would like to hear from you from being a part of this process. Our mother.
For the record, Joanne Hardesty. In regard to the monitor, I've looked at most settlement agreements end up with a court-appointed monitor. The reason we ended up with the Community Oversight Advisory Board was because the community did not feel like the DOJ represented our interests when they ultimately came up with the settlement agreement. And therefore, we wanted to make sure that the community stayed engaged. What normally happens in communities with a court-appointed monitor is that the community is cut out of the process. So the professionals are the ones that are talking to the police, gathering information, having conversations with the judge, and the community has no role in that. And we did not want to see that happen here in Portland, which was why we recommended a Community Oversight Advisory Board. at this late stage, knowing what we know now about just kind of how this process has happened, I think that we would be creating a new model for oversight if we now requested a court-appointed monitor. Because the question would be, what would your role be? Because again, in most cities that have a monitor, there is no community oversight, so the monitor is it. And so I think, but I don't think it's impossible if that was something you wanted to do, since you're already talking about requesting changes to the settlement agreement. But I would think about not losing the community voice, especially at the federal court level. I mean, we have access at the federal court. We're the only community in the country that actually gets to have our voice at the federal court level. And that's huge. And so if we have to give that up to have a court-appointed monitor, I would not support that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know, I just wanted to speak on that too. And I think that having a court-appointed monitor would probably enhance our ability to get with the judge, talk with the judge, will enhance COAB. Right now, COAB is, I don't know, we've kind of been in a kind of stifled a little bit, and because what reasons are unknown. But I think a court-appointed monitor will not only enhance COAB, but it will enhance public involvement, community involvement. I think a court-appointed monitor would make sure, as COAB, we would still be a board. We'd still stand as a board. And I think with the court-appointed monitor right there, they'd make sure, they'd oversight, make sure that we're including the community in everything we do. So I really think a court-appointed monitor may be the way to go. And now I'll even take it a step further. The court-appointed monitor would be nice if he or she or the organization lived in the city of Portland, or lived in the town. So that's my take on that. And I think we've been stifled for the last year and a half somewhat. And I agree with you, Tasha, we have made some progress. It's not like we haven't made any progress whatsoever. We have. But we continued progress to make. And then there's some dissensions involved that we need to clarify. And right now, at this point, I'm going to just stand and say what I believe. Right now, a court-appointed monitor would be the way to go. Not even, I'll say it for two reasons. One is, I got a letter from Coco. They said they want to divorce us. What am I going to do? I don't want to divorce. We're going to go to Judge Judy or somebody for divorce court? No, they did. They said they want to divorce us. That's a whole other story. So, and that's the case, so be it. So we got to step back a minute and go through some divorce documents or divorce decree, as somebody might have put it. Maybe we have to do that. But by doing that, if we stay where we are now and do anything, we won't do nothing. We won't get nothing done. But by making some kind of changes now and some just a few changes, some tweaks, we'll be all right. Because this board is not going anywhere until the term limits are up. This board is here. This board is committed. We've been here for a year and a half. Hell, you think just be around here for a year and a half? I can watch a baseball game right now or something. At home with my wife doing something different. I'm going to sit here and argue about who should be where. I'm not the one, and I don't think the board is. That's the commitment. And that's the commitment to police reform. We are committed to police. I am totally committed to police reform by any means necessary. I am totally committed to police reform. I am. I want to be sure. I want to be saying that. I know there's processes and different kinds of ways to get to where we want to go, but we all got to stand here and say, let's work through these processes. But I'm totally committed. So that's my piece on that. And I'm definitely in favor of a court-appointed monitor at this time, for sure.
Thank you. Philip?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to Maria in your question about the court-appointed monitor. So that recommendation specifically is talking about the court-appointed monitor, not COCL. We're not making that decision to dismiss COCL from their responsibilities, but COCL will have less of a role, will play less of a role and have fewer responsibilities, so we can flex our wings a little bit and really get into this process instead of feeling micromanaged. I think that's the point, is that they could play less of a role, and then the court-appointed monitor to do more of the work, more of the legalese, and really we can follow their process. They go about their way, we go about ours, but we can work in parallel and traverse this together. And move forward with that. Does that answer some of your question? Or I don't know if that helps to clarify anything.
It does. I was more just worried, like, wondering what is going to happen that I'm not seeing. Like, are we still going to be able to have access to spaces or interpreters or all of the things that we need to keep our meetings going? So it's not so much that I feel like we need to have COCO like be in a relationship with COAB anymore. I'm okay with breaking up, but I was more wondering like how, like, it's kind of like splitting the apartment. Like, what does that look like when people are moving out, and like just as far as funds and like what do we get, what do they get, like, then move on. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I guess sitting in the audience, it occurs to me that what it sounds like you're asking for is a court-appointed monitor, a COCO, and a COAB. And I want you to know that all three of those come with significant money. So we know that we already have a contract, a big contract with the COCO. And so you have to balance. What you're asking the city is to maybe triple the investment in this process. And I think that you have to be realistic and either say you're going to fire the current COCO and go with a court-appointed monitor, and then re-envision what the COAB does after that. But I think it's unrealistic to expect the city and the DOJ to sign off on us being the only community that has all of the above. And so you have, and I think you will only have one opportunity to do an ask in changing the settlement agreement. And so it would be better if you had, as a whole group, a conversation about what are your primary needs. If it's the COCO that's not working, then let's deal with that. If it's the communication that's not working, then let's deal with that. But don't throw everything into one basket, because again, you're gonna only have one chance to present to the DOJ what changes there are that you want. And I just think it's unrealistic to think that they're gonna pay for all three, when no other community in the country that's under Department of Justice settlement agreement has all three. Thank you.
Other discussion? Or
Yeah, discussion if you will. All three pay for something, pay for nothing. We gotta pay for something. Okay. Now I go to the store. I go to Target or wherever I go to, and I buy some shoes for $100 or whatever they may cost. But the shoes don't work for me. They're no good. What do? I keep the shoes anyway after I paid the $100, and I can't get the receipt or I can't get the money back. Now the money's already spent. Do I keep the shoes anyway and get sore feet, get corns on my feet, or do I decide I need to get another pair of shoes? I need to get a pair that work for me. This is gonna cost me another $100. This is gonna cost me some extra money, some extra expenditure that I didn't want to spend, but in the end, it's gonna save a whole lot of lives, a whole lot of people, a whole lot of community. It's gonna be a whole lot better than if I'd have kept an old pair of shoes that wasn't fitting, that wasn't working with holes in them. So we need to change shoes, in my opinion, right now. And if it costs money, we need to go with that. I mean, hey, we really do. I mean, I don't want to scale down. I don't want to scale up for that, if you will. But I don't want to be cheap. And I don't want to cheat lives.
okay. So we have a COAB member on the phone that would like to weigh in. V, I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this. V, are you on? Hello, V? Do you want to keep trying? And
Go ahead.
Okay, there we go. V, you're on. V, are you there? Let me take an additional comment, and then we can always come back. Philip?
Yeah, really, it's pretty simple. It's tripling the cost if we don't move forward and make these reforms. It's going to cost more, and we're going to suffer more.
So I've been listening to the live stream. I'm in attendance all the way from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania station. I think we can gain a lot of insight when we look at the three recommendations in unison in terms of the overall impact and potential outcomes that they will have. And that is to say, I really appreciated what Jimmy said, most specifically that we will have more room to become more involved in a way that makes us feel as though we're involved in a process that's helping to restore our community and to help our TPB do the reforms that have been outlined. So I think the conversation sort of gets sort of confusing when we start separating each of these three recommendations into individual points. And that if we start to look at it as a whole, the sort of impact this structural change can make for our community, then I think that's where the wisdom of the COAB can really shine on behalf of the community. So I think restoration of trust in the community at this point is beyond critical. I think we're at a point of necessity. Thank you for your time and patience.
Thank you. Tom?
One comment. For Joanne or anyone else who may misunderstand the recommendation doesn't address whether we are recommending that the COCO be replaced entirely. We're not taking that position with this recommendation. If the recommendation is passed, it will go on, and the DOJ and the city will discuss what to do about the recommendation. They may just say, we're not going to change anything. Or they may say, we want to do that. We want to have a court-appointed monitor. And then they will decide whether anything is left for the COCO to do. This isn't suggesting that that's going to happen. So it may or may not cost more money. And Jimmy's right. We're talking about lives. But it isn't an attempt to have three different entities, because there may not be a COCO if the court-appointed monitor is put in place and the DOJ and the city decides they're doing all the work of the COCO plus other things. Thank you.
Rebecca Hanna.
Thank you all. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I find myself still not ready to vote. I'd make a friendly amendment, but I don't think it would be included, and that would be to change the language to explore whether COCO should be replaced in whole and part. I think that, as I said earlier, I'm intrigued, but I really thank Vi for her comments, and I would like to concur with them. I think I would like to think about this in whole with there's a lot of other ideas that are out there, but if we simply vote on this one, then we are stuck with that as the model. And I think what we're asking is, what are the unintended consequences of voting on one model over another, without having explored lots of different ideas, and then coming to a recommendation that I think I at least could feel I could get strongly behind. I'd love to get more information about this concept. I would love to hear from from the city or DOJ or others about what is positive or what is negative about this model. I just feel that I'm personally not prepared to vote on this as it stands.
So you've heard Rebecca Hanna ask for a friendly
Should we
amendment.
close discussion?
Excuse me?
Should we close discussion?
Well, I had a question of the group, because I think you've heard Rebecca Hanna ask for a friendly amendment, and I just wanted to get a pulse from the group to see if that's something that you would like to entertain, or whether you want to just move forward and go to public comment.
I favor public comment.
Okay. Do you want to lose?
Public comment.
Okay, so we're closing this discussion and we invite public comment. Again, to remind you, if you could please state your name for our records. And you will have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Dan Handelman again with Portland Cop Watch. And you know, we haven't really had time to contemplate this specific recommendation, but in the past couple of weeks and kind of at the beginning of this process, we've seen the city make mistakes of trying to solve a problem by putting in the wrong solution. Right now, there's a solution that they want to have for the Citizen Review Committee that they just put forward to get rid of public appeal hearings, which is not what's causing that process to take so long. Earlier this week, there was this proposed solution for you to meet in a different room from the community. That was not the right solution to the problem that was going on. So I just want to make sure that whatever you do, you don't create a new problem. If you do make an amendment to this, I would suggest strongly putting in wording about how this court-appointed monitor interacts with this group. So there's no question that this group continues, and there's no question that there'll be public meetings, there's no question that the community can continue to have a voice. And I'm pointing back to the community in the seats here as well as to you when I say that. So, you know, I just want to make sure we don't get rid of the good parts of the system that we have right now that exist, even though we're frustrated because we're not hearing back from the city what's being implemented that you recommend. When I say at the beginning of the process, one of the things that happened, I don't know if you remember this, the Community Police Relations Committee, which fell apart on its own afterward, was going to be replaced. They were going to stop looking at racial profiling and become this body. And the community pushed back, and instead this body was created separate. So I just want to make sure you are solving the problem that you're raising. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Kalei Lubin. For the past 6 years, I've been attending all of the Citizen Committee meetings concerning police and community relations. That meant that I used to attend the Community Police Relations Committee that was conducted by the Human Rights Commission. They've gone into hiatus. So that citizen group no longer meets with police officers as we once did. So what Dan was just saying about the CRC being under pressure, you do need to take into consideration, and if you feel under pressure, there may be no place for the citizens to actually meet with police officers and have conversations. So I think it's really important that we heed what the rabbi has said. These are weighty decisions that must be made, and so we have to be clear in our minds what we're really trying to do. The second thing that I want to bring up to you, and this is to go along with what Joanne said, is there a problem with a failure of communication? I think there is. And I think the failure comes about because there have been at least 2 committees that I know about that are supposed to be working, DOJ and city attorney, together to resolve some of these issues. One that I know about is called the monthly directives meeting which, as I understand it, the recommendations that came from this committee is supposed to go to that committee where the DOJ and the city meet together and resolve those issues. We haven't heard any reports from them, and I'm hearing that they have a lot of work to do, but if they meet only once a month, that would delay the project. The second committee that had been meeting was with the Independent Police Review and the process of review. A report has come out, it's very meek, it's very mild, and it's not going to solve the problems. So we do need to be aware that when this settlement agreement was written, it was written between two attorneys, one from the United States, one from the city of Portland. They agreed to collaborate. The public needs to see that collaboration producing some kind of fruit, not just silence. I have asked the city attorney, before releasing directives for public comment in the future, check for constitutionality. I've been told again and again, I don't understand the process. After we talk, they will decide. That's the process. So it feels to me like a lot of the frustration that we're feeling comes about because much of what we need to know is not given to us. Leadership probably would solve that problem, but that might be too much to ask.
Thank you.
Hi, Joanne Hardesty back. As a community member concerned about reform of Portland Police, I am very concerned to know that the mayor is negotiating behind closed doors a new police contract that doesn't expire for another year, and there's really no reason for him to be doing behind closed door negotiations on a new contract. As a community member, I am concerned about what the outgoing mayor is going to give away, and he won't have to live with the consequences of those actions. I understand that there are also closed-door meetings at City Hall to change how the police oversight process works in the city. And again, you as the Community Oversight Board should be involved in those conversations if those conversations are happening. And the fact that they're happening behind closed doors and they're happening when they don't need to be happening, because the next mayor, who will take office in January, should be the one negotiating the police contract. And I understand that they're also negotiating policy on body cams, even though the mayor and the former police chief, Larry O'Day, assured the public that they would have input on developing the public policy that would surround body cams. And so I am extremely concerned that this is all happening without your input, without any additional public input, and it will become law and you will be able to do nothing about it because it will be for the life of that contract. And so my question to you as the body that we, the community, come to seeking to make sure that reform is really happening, I would hope that you would absolutely, almost immediately demand to be a part of any negotiation that's taking place, because it is totally inappropriate for it to be taking place right now. And ironically, the only reason I know is because the Oregonian published it. Had it not been in the Oregonian, I would have been just as shocked as you that all of a sudden there's a new police contract negotiated by someone who will not have to live with the consequences of those negotiations. And if I know what I know from the last time that contract was negotiated, it was at the very beginning of our deliberations with the Department of Justice, and there was an opportunity then to do away with the 48-hour rule, and the mayor chose to not even bring it up in the contract talk. And when I asked why, the response was, oh, they'll never give that up. Now, if you couldn't ask for it when the DOJ is breathing down your neck, I'm not quite sure when you could ask to remove the 48-hour rule, but I can assure you that if those negotiations are secret, we, the public, will not like what comes out of those negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Nancy Newell. I've been an observer of the police activities within the city as well as New York City. I have a good friend who's a main lawyer on these issues representing the public in New York. And I just recently visited him and said, these things are out of control in police departments throughout the country. This is something that's not just unique to Portland. What concerns me is that our own mayor, who is the police commissioner, non-transparently made a decision to keep the chief after the chief decided to cover up his own inappropriate actions with a pistol and harmed one of his own officers. He shouldn't be a police commissioner. That's an illegal action. If we are here to trust our leadership, how come they can break the law and we can't? And we can't even get truth told in situations with police officers.
I'm going to have to remind you that the comment is related to the conversation around the recommendation.
It is related, because how do you have oversight if the people that are insisting there be oversight and the judge is saying the settlement should have oversight? We've lost our police chief. We have a new police chief that we haven't even vetted their qualifications. We haven't been allowed to do that. What are we helping with accountability? This is confusing to the public. Where do you develop trust? It's totally related to what this committee is trying to do. And it's very serious. And I think something should be addressed immediately.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we can take one more comment.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Charles Johnson, and of the previous comments, the most relevant thing was whoever suggested that when we, there's been some concern about the budget, but somebody specifically said that, I think it was Mr. Handelman said, that if you move forward with the suggestion or recommendation from the COAB that we go to a court-appointed monitor, we specifically mentioned the enduring function of a community site advisory board, so that that court-appointed monitor would still have to be highly engaged with the public. We do have the issues Ms. Hardesty pointed out, which are surrounded in this gestalt of what Ms. Newell mentioned, in that we don't know, the implementation essentially comes to the police commissioner, which is the mayor, who we don't know if his competency includes finding out that the current police chief, Marshman, choked, or there was a police report involving the current police chief choked. We don't know if that came up in the vetting, or if there was no vetting and we just appointed Marshman because he was the only untainted person available. So I think that there's been a pussyfooting problem here among the COAB, influenced by the COCL. I think the COAB has been somewhat coached to be cozy to the police and in some cases hostile to the public. So I think that the COAB members should keep that in mind as you work on moving this recommendation forward, that if we go for a court-appointed monitor, there needs to be real public engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. This will be our last comment.
Thank you. I'm Deborah Harrison. Quite briefly, just my thoughts are not to dissolve the relationship, but definitely include the court-appointed monitor to help expedite the agreement, because we're talking about human lives here. This isn't another Tuskegee Institute. This isn't another Belmont report that we're looking at. This isn't an experiment we're looking at. This is something that has to happen. We're going to weigh the cost over the benefits. In a small town, how many people have to die or be hit by a train before the city decides, let's put a stoplight up here? And in closing, I basically want to say, if not replacing or changing the relationship, continuing with the relationship, but if there are people or persons in place who have lost their effectiveness, who have lost their credibility, and the community just no longer see the effectiveness of it, then maybe the people or the persons need to be replaced. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to the COAB members to see if you'd like to continue with. I understand that. We have someone else in the from the public that wishes to make a comment, and I'm also concerned about time, but I want to make sure that I'm not going against what you'd like to do. So, would you like to extend this public comment session?
Greetings, my name is Pat Adams. I've been attending meetings, the COAB meetings and some subcommittee meetings for some time now. And I keep attending because I really like you guys. And I really think you're on the right track, and I really think you're doing the right work, and I think you have the right people. What comes to me about this discussion is that it seems to me that the COAB has a job to make recommendations. That's a serious job. And I've seen you do really good work on there, studying the policies and making recommendations. And that is a huge task, and it's really, really important, the recommendations that you will make. Another job is implementation. You make recommendations, but if they don't get implemented, there's a real frustration. But if implementation is not your job, and I would hate to see you spend all your time trying to figure out how to implement and give up all your good efforts on making the recommendations that the city and the police bureau need to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Lightning with Lightning Watchdog PDX. One of the concerns I have with Seattle is, of course, we want to get an idea of what the cost is going to be on this. I mean, we have Seattle already doing it. Do we need to get a consultant also from Seattle maybe to come by and offer their recommendations on this before? This is a very important issue to vote on, and I think a tremendous amount more data needs to be provided to everybody. We need to get a clear understanding of the overall cost. Are there any type of additional grants that can be applied for and help funding the additional costs that we might have on this, court-appointed monitors? And also we're talking private legal counsel. These are all concerns to me really coming down to the overall cost. I think it needs to be more of a blended type situation, and then maybe phase out possibly certain groups in the end. But community, again, and I think Joanne brought this up, is to me the most important issue on having the community involvement and not get it pushed off to the attorneys, to the court-appointed monitors, and not allow the community to really have the input that I think is necessary and will separate Portland from Seattle in these other locations, and look at the overall cost, but the benefits it will have, but do not start taking the COCO out, even removing the COAB out based upon a court-appointed monitor or attorneys. And no disrespect to you, Mr. Stinson, as an attorney. I don't know when your term is going to end, but a lot of the suggestions here are almost from an attorney that is basically looking at other attorneys to be able to do this better than the communities can, and I would have to disagree with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes public comment. Are we okay with that? We've got Senator Gordley has been waiting to weigh in, and so I'd like to give her an opportunity as a COAB member to weigh in. Abel, are you on?
Hello. Hello.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Abel. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, but we get feedback when I respond.
All right. Have we moved past the public comment?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to call the question.
Go ahead.
Call for a vote. Hello?
She wants to call for the question.
Hello?
Go ahead.
I'm asking, calling for a vote.
Did you have a comment?
I just wanted to make a comment about the role of the monitor. Much of the work that the COCL does in our quarterly reports, or now our semi-annual reports, is what a monitor does as well. Now, there may be a different issue on what you think of that work, but that is much of the same work as what a monitor would do, even though we have a slightly different role and relationship. Just to clarify that.
So she was asking for a vote. I don't think we need to be I feel like you're trying to affect our decision, and I don't understand why you're speaking to this right now. Avel had already moved to a vote. It's been seconded. So I don't know why you're adding that commentary now. The process is a move to vote and then a second, and then we do the roll call.
I guess
that was my understanding.
I didn't realize that Avel was going to call for a vote, and I had a comment, and I wanted to wait until she had had her turn to make a comment. I just am trying to provide some clarifying information. Again, you know, what you think of the work we've done is a separate thing, but if you're looking at what the job description of the COCL is, much of the things that we're doing is what a monitor would do, but in a slightly different role. The other thing is I mean, certainly monitors are people with national expertise, and again, you can argue our credentials, but part of the reason we were selected was because of our credentials. That doesn't mean I'm saying that you have to agree that we were the best credentials, but we are national experts in the fields that we work.
I'm gonna head. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have. I think it's time to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Can you?
There was a motion.
There was a motion. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop for a second and clarify. There was a motion. The motion was made by Philip. It was seconded by Jimmy. It is specific to point number 2 on your recommendations. The question has been called by Val. It was seconded by Jimmy, and I think it's time for a vote. Can you do a roll call?
Yes, certainly. We can go through. Rabbi Kahana?
Abstain.
Catherine Gardner?
Abstain.
Avel Gordley?
Yes.
Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Laquita Langford?
Abstain.
Maria Medina?
Yeah. This is just for number 2, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. V. Riviere?
She's a yes.
Rochelle Silver?
Yes.
Tom Steenson?
Yes.
Philip Wolf?
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays, 3 abstentions. Motion does not pass.
I have a question.
Tom?
If it would make a difference to any of the 3 who abstained, I would propose a friendly amendment that would state unequivocally that this recommendation does not seek to alter the existence of the COAB or its its purpose, that it would remain the voice of the community, and there was never any intention to diminish that voice. And if that would make a difference to any of the three, then I would like to call for a revote. I'm seeing it might, so I would.
Catherine, did you something?
Yeah, I'd like to change to yes. Can you restate the motion for the record?
The original motion is not changed. The friendly amendment is that this recommendation specifically means that the COAB will continue to exist in its current role, and that it will continue to be the voice of the community. And nothing about this recommendation is intended to reduce that in any way, that the COAB will remain as viable in the future as it is now with the court-appointed monitor.
So Catherine has amended her vote. Are there any others that wish to do so?
So we'll recall. Rabbi Kahana?
Abstain.
Catherine Gardner?
Yes.
Val Gordley?
I would presume to yes, but we can still check.
Okay. Jimmy Johnson? Yes. Guido Langford?
Abstain.
Maria Medina? V. Riviere?
Same issue.
Okay. Rochelle Silver? Yes. Tom Stevenson?
Yes.
And Philip Wolf?
Yes.
I will check the vote.
Philip?
So while we're waiting, I was wondering if we could move on to the third recommendation, just for time's sake, because this is very time sensitive and we need to vote on these. So with that being said, I move to extend time for this meeting.
Is there a second? So Philip has requested to extend the time for this meeting. I think we're going to have to do another vote.
Rabbi? That's for the previous votes?
Correct.
Okay. So on the issue of extending time of the meeting, I'm going to go through the poll. Okay. Rabbi Kahana?
No.
Catherine Gardner?
No.
Val Gordley? We'll come back to that. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Laquita Langford? No. Maria Medina? No. V? Rochelle? Tom Stevenson?
Yes.
Philip?
Yes.
So we have 4 no's, 2 that aren't in, and right, 1, 2, 3. It's 4 and 4 right now.
Come on.
turn it back.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to read something, if it's okay with the group, real quickly. It's just me. The settlement agreement is about police reform. The city of Portland and the Portland Police Bureau has agreed with the DOJ that police reform is needed in Portland and throughout the nation. I became a board member because I am deeply committed to police reform. I have dealt with police officers in their best, doing great jobs and serving our community. And I have also dealt with police officers in their worst, escalating an encounter to a point where unintended safety issues occurred. This, however, is a small number of officers. But even one unnecessary escalated encounter can be dangerous for our community as well as for the officers involved. The settlement agreement is the focal point. The settlement agreement focal point is mental health treatment by PPB. And by creating a culture of service and respect for people with mental issues, we'll create a culture of service and respect for all people. And I apply the police behavioral health unit for the work they've done over the last 3 years. If our community works together, police reform can become a reality. Thank you.
Senator Hartley is a yes on the friendly amended motion. She is a no on extended meeting.
Right, deuces. So it's 5 and 5, it doesn't pass.
So it's 8:19, and we have also public comment, and I am concerned about what this group would like to do. Hmm?
I didn't get a response from that last vote. I didn't get it.
So the count, so both of them. Right. Avell, Senator Gordley, and V were both yeses.
Which, yes, it passed 8, aye, 0 nay, 2 abstentions. As amended.
So you would like to open it up for the general comments?
Yes.
So at this point, we invite any community members for general comments. Again, you have 2 minutes, and we probably can take 5 individuals at 2 minutes. Come on up. Just state your name.
So my name is David Keith Davis with Multnomah County Cop Watch, separate from Portland Cop Watch. But you know, you brought up right on. You brought up the fact that the behavioral health unit is a good thing, and you're making some progress. I definitely think that the behavioral health unit is one of the better aspects of the Portland Police, but the reality of the situation is the behavioral health unit gets not even as much funding as parking enforcement in this town and traffic enforcement and other things. So obviously it's not that big of a priority. And I also think that something like the behavioral health unit should maybe be separated from the police and actually be a unit that doesn't involve police officers, and they might possibly have some, you know, community liaison people that work with you guys, but I don't necessarily think that the police need to be the ones dealing with mental crises in a lot of situations. And also, you know, bringing up the whole thing about all these secret negotiations and contracts, you know, with the mayor and the police union. This mayor is a straight criminal, and he needs to, you know, be charged criminally for covering up with the Chief O'Day shooting and all that. He doesn't need to be working on any police contracts or anything else. He should actually resign as mayor and police commissioner immediately, just like Chief O'Day and all the other people that are being shuffled around and retiring all of a sudden. So, you know, that's the reality of the situation. You can't have a criminal mayor / police commissioner on his last little 5 months or so in office making important decisions for the people of Portland that will affect all of us and, you know, and affect the work of this board and all kinds of stuff. So, you know, he needs to step down, and he should not be involved in any negotiations of anything. He should be resigning in shame. And that's all I'll say for now.
Thank you.
Hi there, Katie Houle. One thing you had mentioned, Tasha, about police and trust and, you know, just those relationships. I mean, I have to say, I've never really gotten the sense that there was buy-in from the police department at these meetings, you know. It seemed like there was a lot of resistance to changing anything, and there were times I left asking myself, why are they even here if they think everything they're doing is perfect? So, I mean, and, you know, I understand people are busy and, you know, you guys work full-time and stuff, but I haven't seen a lot of you guys at the table much, and so, you know, it's hard to build trust or any of that if, like, the people really aren't interested in the process and aren't even at the table to have discussions.
Thank you.
Hi, again, I'm still Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch, and the 48-hour rule is, you know, has been being addressed behind closed doors, and the PPA was willing to take money to get rid of it. And since they came here and argued, and Dr. Moreland was very good about saying that there's no science to support what they were saying, they argued they needed 48 hours so their memory would work better, but they were willing to get rid of the rule. If they're paid enough money, I think the city should just get rid of the rule. When we were talking about the your future and the structure and everything, one of the things that I wonder about the monitor is, do they move into the city where they are overseeing people? Because one of the biggest problems I think we have here is that we have people who are not engaged in the community on a daily basis, being the COCL. And that's a decision was made by the city. It's not their fault, they don't live here, but it's certainly the fault of the city for making that decision. One of the reasons it took so long for this whole group to get off the ground was that the city filed a motion to, you know, hold up the entire lawsuit. So your board didn't even get started until 2.5 years into the process, and that's another issue about why nothing's getting done. And I just want to always remember these things and how we got to the place where we are. And I just want to repeat not to try to fix a problem by making the wrong fix for it. On that note, I'm very glad that you did away with the filming area tonight. I'm hoping you can continue that as the new overriding rule. And I went to the Training Advisory Council meeting last night, and they discussed their first recommendations that they've ever made. And that in the packet of information, they said that they've gotten access to training documents for the first time in the 4 years that they've existed. Okay, I'll wrap it up. They also said they didn't get the same documents that you all have at the COAB. So you've gotten more information about training than the Training Advisory Council. So I don't know what's going on back behind the scenes, but that's what they said.
Thank you. We can take 2 more.
Good evening again, and also my name is still Dan Handelman. Charles Johnson. We're fortunate to have in the room, I don't know how much press, but definitely Maxine Bernstein from the Oregonian, who yesterday let us know that the police are talking about changing the IPR CRC structure. And I'm sure all of you on the COAB are thrilled about how much the mayor and any other city officials have engaged with you about that idea. I'm sure they'll tell you it's out of bounds of your COAB. We know we have a lame duck mayor who's going away. You've heard other excellent, more respected than me, community leaders, Ms. Hardesty, Mr. Handelman, talk about that we're going to get a new police contract, and your work is going to, there's going to be binding things. And I hope that you as COAB people feel empowered to talk about I called City Commissioner so-and-so and I've not heard back. That regardless of what you think in the past, the COCL or previous COCL chairs have, what we want, what I, and I think the majority of the community wants, is an activist COAB who is facilitating community confidence in the police. It's an awkward situation. You have 5 non-voting police members who are supposed to be here, and we always want to have a good, smooth working relationship with the powers that be, powers that have impunity, some people would say. But I'd love to see the COAB, all the COAB members, be more interested in robust community engagement than people pleasing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to say that, for the record, Kendra James, Black Lives Matter. Keaton Otis, Black Lives Matter. James Perez, Black Lives Matter. So I would not be sitting here for a year and a half, not wanting this process to work for the city of Portland, if I did not believe that Black Lives Matter. And I'm saying that on the record in front of everybody in this room and who's listening, as an activist that's been out here in these streets 1 week today. And when you talk about my community and you're not in my community, that pisses me off. So thank you, Joanne, for being in the community every single time that I see you and people want reform. Be in the community talking to the people about the issues that they have. Black Lives Matter.
I second that.
Thank you.
I'm Pat Adams. One of the things I observe here is that there's a lot of talk about people who aren't doing their jobs, people who are doing bad things. And while this issue of the relationship between police and the citizens, it manifests itself in stories, it manifests itself in events, and it's people. But the solution is not people. The solution is the system. And my observation is that people get arrested and people get treated in ways according not to laws and not to the police themselves, but according to policies and practice. And that we actually lack policies and practice that will govern, because getting rid of one person, if you don't have a system that works, if you don't have a system that's right, then you're just going to get the same person back, or you're going to get another person who's going to act that way. So this is a systematic change that needs to happen. And I believe that who gets arrested is much more a matter of policy and practice than it is laws and police. So your mission is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're at 8:30 now. Senator Gordley wanted me to read a statement to you. Basically, she'd like to encourage everyone to read Kathleen's exit report. It's instructive and constructive. She'd also like to personally thank Kathleen for the work that she did. And you should all have been emailed that report. I believe it's also on the COAB webpage. But she put a lot of thought into it, and there's a lot of good information for thinking about moving forward. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And did you have?
Well, I wanted to see if anyone from the COAB wanted to share a final appreciation or reflection.
I appreciate this meeting running smoothly, and I appreciate being able to speak without being interrupted. And I also wanted to tell the 2 activists that are sitting back here that I know who came to a meeting, to the executive committee meeting, and we had a little bit of a hard time communicating, that I appreciate you both, and I'm glad that you're both here.
Thank you. Philip?
Before I joined COAB, I knew a very little amount about the settle agreement. I knew not much. I'd heard some information, I'd read a little bit, but I wasn't very knowledgeable. When I was appointed to be involved with COAB, I was surprised and continued to learn a great amount. I've done a great amount of reading. I've gotten to know everyone on the COAB. There's different personalities. I've gotten to know everyone here. I've interacted with police, and I have to admit, that's not something I ever would have envisioned doing, interacting in this capacity with police and officers. And COAB has had struggles, and we are struggling together, and the community is struggling. And I just want to say what I've learned today is that the community comes first. The Department of Justice, the Portland Police Bureau, all that is there, but the community is first, and we work up from there. Police accountability, in my opinion, the good cops are accountable for not calling out bad officers. And when we have good cops calling out bad cops, that will help us solve the problem. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Final comments. So we've got Tom, then we'll go to Jimmy, then we'll go to Rabbi Gahana.
To follow up on Laquita's comments, and I don't think there's anyone from the city here tonight other than the lieutenant, but she doesn't have the authority to make these changes. But it is an absolute tragedy that this community board passed 9 bias-free policing recommendations, which would directly affect the issues regarding racial profiling, and in particular, the treatment of African Americans in this community. And I am sickened by the fact that the city doesn't care enough about that issue to even do a thing with those 9 recommendations. They're sitting there gathering dust while black people in this country are being killed because of racial profiling.
I have a question. I want to make it a motion, and if it's okay with the board, I want to make a motion. And this is the motion I want to make.
We're curious.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, well, this is more. I want to have a motion where we forego our August meeting and come back in September. I want to see COAB, the board. We don't have another meeting in August, but we have one in September. But we need to take a step back and do whatever it is that we need to do for ourselves and for our city. So I think it'd be good at this time to take a step back and take a summer adjournment, if you will, and come back in September. Now, that's the motion. It's kind of vague, but any questions, jump in.
So I have to say that this board voted not to extend the time of this meeting, and by making a motion, we're extending the meeting. So I asked for parting comments, and I'm just acknowledging that. I'm not trying to interrupt you or be disrespectful, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that you all voted not to extend the meeting.
So, a parting comment, not to.
Yes, sir.
A parting comment. So we can't vote. Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't believe that you can, but you can make another vote. I mean, you can change that, but I don't believe you can at this time. We're past the hour, and I was just giving you a chance to do a final reflection or appreciation or comment.
Well,
You can look forward to see everybody in September.
Yeah, I can vote for myself. That was just a thought. So, carry on.
Thank you. Rabbi Gahana. Oh, and Rochelle, you had something too.
It was related to what Jimmy was making a motion about. I appreciate your motion because what you're saying is we're all a little overwhelmed and tired and need some R&R. But we have some very, very important work to do right now, and that's related to police accountability. As you heard people talk about, there are these secret meetings going on relative to accountability, and our accountability subcommittee, which I am not a member of, but I attend, has put forward some very important work that the COAB needs to address. And it would, I think, hurt the community if we didn't do that in a timely way. So thank you for your suggestion that we need some R&R, but we'll have to get it after the accountability.
My thought was, action plans in place continue without having a COAB board meeting until September.
Well, we need the COAB to vote on the recommendation.
Okay, now I understand that.
Somebody move to adjourn the meeting, please, because I can't do it.
I really feel like,
all right,
please.
May I make a final comment?
Rebecca Hanna. And then you can make.
Anybody can walk out on me. I'm used to it. I just want to say, this has been a very emotional past few weeks in our nation and in our city. I've been walking around with a great deal of pain and concern, and I've had some opportunities to be in community forums and have learned a lot and listened a lot. And I think there's great meaning in that, and I hope we can all continue to do that. I want to thank Philip. Philip, I know you really insisted that we had this meeting in the format that we had today, and as you probably know, I approached it with a great deal of trepidation and with real concern that we would not be able to get through the meeting. And I thank you for insisting, and I thank those in the community who listened to each other, listened to us, allowed us to learn from each other. There's much work. There's much work to do to heal in our city and in our nation. I think that we can work together. I think there are some great recommendations that Kathleen Sadat gave, and I thank her for the work that she did with us. I'd like us to use this time to study some of those recommendations, other recommendations that we've heard about today, think about how we can restructure and really be a body that listens to all sides and helps both sides to listen to each other. Thank you.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
I second.
Yeah. Bye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.